Alright, so today's video is relevant, I believe, again, to both our programs of social work with victims of abuse and family counseling, and perhaps all kinds of other ways. So I want to talk about friendship. So friendship could be thought of in lots and lots of different ways. Friendship could be thought of as micropolitical behavior. Friendship could be thought, I saw your face squinch up there, right? And I'll tell you how it could be thought of as micropolitical behavior. If you ask,
I just haven't seen it or heard it.
I know you had. I know, but if you ask yourself, go around with your female friendship network and ask yourself and ask the people you know, how did you go to the Take Back the Night or International Women's Day or the December 6th ceremonies, or how did you decide that you were going to vote NDP or Green? Those kinds of things. And a lot of times people will say, oh, well, one of my friends was involved with Take Back the Night March, and then one day she asked me if I wanted to go, so I went with her, and then it was okay, so I went by myself the next year. So that's micropolitical behavior, right? Okay. If you think of everything as political in the sense of how do you spend your money, what kind of t-shirts do you wear when you go out in, with the Black Lives Matter t-shirts or whatever, right? In lots and lots of ways, micropolitical behavior is female friendship. So not suggesting that every friendship pulls you into a political journey, but many people will say either they learn their political worldviews and values and behaviors from their parents and or from their friends. Because sometimes, however your parents do their politics, and politics also is, do you get involved with United Way? Do you get involved with your church? Because once you're involved with your church or your mosque or your temple, that will often shape how you vote. That will shape how you make certain choices, right? Yes. Which has political consequences. So, having said that, in one of our books here, there's a whole chapter of friendship across the life cycle. And I want to, in our first video on family, we talked about family in the past has been thought of by law and by biology. And we were saying that our feminist revolutionary New World Order is more oriented towards affinities and affections. So the people who matter are the people you care about, are the people in your circle, are the people you share supports and resources with, that you do what used to be called family, right? Like you used to, let's say, if you needed to borrow $50, you'd go and ask your mom or dad. But in our New World Order, you might ask your friends, right? GoFundMe pages, for example. There's a very amazing kind of micropolitical extension of the family. 100 years ago, there was no option. Yeah. Right? On the note of technology, too, friendships are much, much, much easier to maintain and support and juice up and even make now that we have the technology that we have. So for example, Facebook, I'm able to maintain friendships with people that in another generation I might have very readily lost contact with because they are in Toronto, Prince Edward Island, they're in other countries even, right? So the availability of Facebook and all the other kindreds, I'm sure there's 20 other things like Facebook. And there's also phone calls are far more affordable now. Earlier in my life, a long-distance phone call could end up being $100 if you were talking to someone for a while who was far away. But of course, now it's not like that, right? You can, for free or almost free, you can talk to people across the nation. So friendship is becoming more and more on that continuum of family. And I think that's a really wholesome, amazing thing. I think that's very good in lots and lots of ways. Friendship is also something important and supported throughout the whole life cycle. When you think of little kids, the kid who's shy and has no friends is often the kid who will end up more likely to be in a social worker's office because they're being bullied at school, they don't have supports. So the more we can teach everyone to initiate friendships, maintain friendships, believe in friendships, be a good friend, figure out what your own values, beliefs, boundaries, energies, and so on are around friendship, the more we can help people be stronger. Because friendship is like a nutrition for your own identity and your own strength. So also, friendship when a family is having troubles in many, let's say in traditional cultures at one time, it would be if a husband and wife were married and they were having marital conflicts, there might have been the church they could go to and get counseling from the priest or the imam, or they might have gone to grandpa and grandma. You know, the husband goes and talks to grandpa, well, you know, how should I manage this? And the wife goes and talks to her maternal grandmother, how should I manage this, right? So that they had an extended kin network that would have given them advice and maybe suggestions for how to manage better in a marriage. Well, of course, nowadays many of us don't have that extended kin network, and we don't have the religious network. So we have our friends who will give us support or encouragement to be better in the relationships we're in, and or help us if a relationship dissolves. I saw a movie recently with Amy Schumer. I think it was called Single. It was very funny, and it was about women and female friendship, and one of the friends was a fuller-figured woman, and one was a beautiful woman, and so they kind of were, that was one of the subplots of female identity and friendship and loyalty, and how generous should we be with our friends, and when we're giving advice, how should we do so? I thought there were some really amazing subtexts in the movie, and there can't be that many movies with Amy Schumer in them, so Google that if you are interested. And we've also seen there's some movies with men where, of course, they're comedies that I'm thinking of right now. Hangover, I think, is one of them, and it's about before the marriage, these guys go on some bachelor retreat and they get in lots of trouble and so on. But one of the parts of the movie that is relevant to what we're saying today is these guys had been friends for years and years and years, and of course their friendship was going to change as one of them got married, right? And so they're making fun of it because it is a movie, but, and there even was that whole incredibly famous Friends, a comedy that went on for 10 years? It's still in reruns and maybe in different languages all over the planet. So why was that so popular? Part of the reason it was so popular is because a lot of people look for reality checks, guidance, what do you think? Give me a second opinion. And here were some adult people who were a network of, I think, 6 or 7 people who every episode there was some little trouble that one of them would have and the others would guide and make fun of, but we always at the end of the show had the feeling that these 6 folks cared about each other in a good and loyal way. So friendship throughout the life cycle. Little kids need to learn how to be good friends. In the teen years, friendship is very important for both males and females. Males maybe have a lot of friendship support through sports. Females often through their types of leisure activities, hopefully as often now sports, girls. Yeah. But your female friendships are very, very important. So I'm going to insert right here. That's what one of my theses was on. My master's thesis was on female friendship. And so my female friendship thesis was about 3 different ethnocultural groups: Indigenous women, Italian-Canadian women, and white bush trash no-name brand women. So what I did was I interviewed 10 women in each group, and I asked them questions like, what's the first move in a female friendship? How do you know someone wants to be your friend? Do you prefer to make the first move in a female friendship, or do you prefer that somebody initiates with you? What's the nicest thing a female friend has ever done? What's the worst thing a female friend has ever done? Tell me some stories about female friendship. So I interviewed 10 women with those kinds of questions in each group. I also then took the text from all of those interviews and I summarized, and I had 2 key informants from each group. So 12 people at the end in each group. So 36 women from 3 groups helped me to ponder what it means to be a female friend. Right? And I was fascinated to discover Indigenous women and Italian Catholic women were very parallel to each other in lots and lots of ways. And here's some of the ways that they were parallel. they frequently had intergenerational friendships. So they had my grandma and Carlene's grandma were friends. Carlene's mom and my mom were friends, and Carlene and I are friends. Okay? So the traditional intergenerational connections had a lot of meaning. Mm-hmm. Friendship also had in these two groups the kind of meeting that, for example, if I showed up at Carlene's house and her parents are there, and Carlene is away for 2 weeks at her cousin's or something, and I said to Carlene's family, I need a place to stay and I need to borrow $50. Her family would support me, they would know me because of those intergenerational connections and validations. Now I'll give you the contrast with the white women, the white Anglo-Canadian born, no-name brand women. So if I approached a white woman and she said, oh no, I identify as Irish Catholic, or I'm very Polish, or, then I didn't interview them, right? They had to sort of be no-name brand, and we tease about like mutt brand Canadian, mixy, right? And so what these women said was their female friendships came largely through the workplace or through school, and they were situation dependent and context dependent. So they said, disproportionate to the other group, they said things like, I had my female friends, 1 or 2 or 3 of them, from grade school. But when I left grade school and went to high school, I made a couple of new friends and I lost touch with my old friends. Then when I graduated from high school and I started college, I had a couple of new friends. And then when I got my first job, I had a couple of friends from my job. But they don't pull their friendships forward as a collective group. There's probably lots of exceptions to that, of course, but they were very different. Friendship is also very individualized among the white women. So the friendships were, if I took Carlene and I would take a risk and say we're becoming friends over the last few months. Mm-hmm. I don't know your mom, you don't know my mom. You don't know my grandma, I don't know your grandma. I am never going to meet your mom. It's very improbable that you'll ever meet my mom, right? We know each other as individuals. Right? So said differently, if I showed up at your mom's house and said, can I stay here for a couple of weeks and I would like to borrow $50, she probably wouldn't even let me in the house.
No.
Right? Because we're individualistic. Right? Yeah. And so this has a lot of meaning when you're thinking of the life cycle and family. Right? Family, again, if we took those ideas that I just said from female friendship, and I just took the risk and applied it in a bigger way. We don't know, right? But let's say it's the same. Let's say some patterns with either group were the same for Polish women or Chinese women, right? Either one or the other pattern. This has consequences for the nuclear family. This has consequences for kids. This has lots and lots of consequences. So let's say if I was Italian Canadian born or I was Indigenous, one of the things when I asked what's the worst thing that ever happened to you, this was the kind of thing that Italian Canadian women said. They said things like, I had my child's baptism and she knew about the baptism but she didn't show up and I never forgave her for that. So that was very startling to me as a white bush trash person. Hey, I don't even have baptisms, right? Because I'm just I don't have a whole network, a religious network or a kinship network. In a lot of ways, by the time I finished this research, I was very saddened to think, because we tend to think of white Anglo-Canadian born women, we tend to think of them as being more feminist. We tend to think of compared to Indigenous women or Italian Catholic women, Canadian born women, right? But actually, there was a lot of power and support available to these two groups of women from the other women and the others in the network, right? If you can go borrow money or you can quickly get a place to stay or you need a ride or you need someone to babysit your kids, boom, 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 you've got it, right? If you're in these two groups. But the settler women often were very isolated and often could feel when they had a situation, a little mini crisis or a major crisis, they had no one to go to. So either they got to go to a professional, like, oh, I'll go to a women's crisis shelter, or I'll go to the bank and borrow $50, or I'll use my MasterCard. They were less supported in a way, right? Like these things are all very complicated in the whole life journey. But I was surprised to be able to come out of that research and kind of think, that's very interesting. Yay on them that they have all that. Here's where the downside is. If you, when I asked these two groups here, what's the worst thing a woman's ever done, a female friend has ever done? Slept with my husband, slept with my boyfriend, flirted with my boyfriend. So, if that happened, you lost everybody. Because in these two networks, if you did something like that, if you breached one of those collectivist kind of values, ethics, and expectations, you were in big trouble. Because for example, if we're Italian Canadian or Indigenous, and your grandma and my grandma are best friends, and your mom and my mom are friends, and you and I are friends, and then I flirt with your husband, and you refuse to ever speak to me again, that means your mom's going to be mad at my mom, grandma, right? That I'm out, because I broke a big rule, right? Mm-hmm. So there are the good news is there's lots of network of support and help. The bad news is if you breach one of the roles or expectations,
then it has implications in all of your other relationships.
Exactly. It has a domino effect, and you could end up being
completely isolated.
But compared to maybe the white bush trash women, you wouldn't have as much of a comfort maybe, or knowledge of what was plan B. Like, I'll go to the bank, or I'll go to the women's shelter, because you hadn't been informed as much about that network of public resources, let's say, over here. Anonymous public resources versus over here, I could go and borrow $50 from my cousin.
So would you say then that in general, like white bush trash women are using those like professionals more, so it's more likely that when they encounter problems that they'll use them in future, versus someone of an Indigenous background who wouldn't have had access to those things, doesn't know they exist, and likely won't obviously go to things that they don't know.
Right. Throughout the life cycle, to the extent that I could guess, that's what I'd guess, right?
Yeah.
And it's so there's also part of our micropolitical behavior. You can see how that would turn out to have micropolitical implications of what organizations do you donate to, what organizations do you volunteer with, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess for today's video, I wanted to say female friendship, male friendship, from the time you're little to the time you're a teenager till the time you're an adult woman. And then later in life, friendship has a very big meaning in the sense of often for women and for men, as you get older, you might have more illnesses, more vulnerability. As my husband was recently going through his illnesses, 5.5 years of cancer and other illnesses, I have to say that one at a time, all his friends faded away almost. And people he used to have gone for coffee with once a week for years, or that he would go for a walk with, or he'd go for a bicycle ride with, or he'd go to the gym with, those people kind of faded out because they maybe didn't know how to be with him anymore. They didn't know what to talk with him about anymore. So because his friendships faded, it put more of a burden on the family, right? And that's, I would suggest, a very common thing. If you have a strong, wide network of friends and family, bloodline or legal line family, if you're ill, you have supports you can call upon. Ken still had 1 or 2 or 3 friends who visited now and then. He had one in particular who was very available and would drive us to the hospital, or in a crunch when I had to work and Ken had to see a specialist, this friend would go with Ken, right? So these are things to reflect upon. The more in any family, every person in the family has friendships, a wide, healthy, supportive, encouraging, well-resourced friendship network, the better off you're going to be. And some of those things could be very small, but collectively, if you don't have them, it can end up with more conflict in the family unit. So if there's, let's say, take a classic story, husband, wife, 2 kids. If both the mom and dad are working a 40-hour week at jobs they don't really like very much, like crappy jobs of waitressing or working at Canadian Tire, that kind of thing. So they have a lot of stress. They have a lot of obedience to the workplace. They can't have the privilege of saying, oh, I need those 3 days off because one of my kids is having trouble with dental work or something, right? That more middle class or rich people could have available. So if the family has friends, then the mom could say, oh, my best friend is going to spend time with my kid and her kid and take them to a movie or those kind of things. And that can lower the stress in a household. If you have friends, if I take the example over here, my brother married into an Italian Catholic family, so I can talk about his story a little bit. I'm sure he'll be okay with this. He'll forgive me. When we had the wedding, from my family, there were, I think, 4 of us who showed up at the wedding, and there were, from his bride's side, about 100 people. Because in Italian Catholic families, apparently, weddings are very big. At the wedding, to my astonishment, people brought, they ended up, the day after the wedding, they had a dining room set, a fridge, a stove, they had a bedroom set, they had dishes, they had every possible thing you could think of because those 100 people all gave a gift for the wedding.
Yeah.
Right? Then you also had even my brother, when he married her, moved into the house that was owned by her parents. So he, in effect, was looking out his kitchen window at his in-laws' house. Like, right? You see what I mean? And so at first, I was like, oh, wow, this is luxurious and delicious, and yay, bro, good choice. But here's the other part of that. That means all my brother's married life, when uncle so-and-so and so, or cousin so-and-so and so and so-and-so needs their computer fixed, the snow shoveled because they broke their leg, the roof fixed, there's a big group of the network of family going to all show up and paint this new house that so-and-so's moving into, right? And so the good news is that you can receive assets and resources and supports and encouragement. The bad news is
You've also signed yourself up for a lot of work.
all your life, right? Because what goes around comes around. So it's an insurance network in a way too, right? Like a sickness insurance, illness. My brother repairs computers, right? So you can imagine how many relatives love him. You don't know me. I'm your 47th cousin. I'm 19 times removed or something. But my word isn't working. Right? So that I'm being a little bit playful, but friendship and family can have a lot of consequences. So in this network that I'm describing over here, yay on them. There's a lot of beautifulness in that. That means people aren't as likely to end up in a social worker's office compared to over here working poor white folk who may feel very unsettled, very disconnected, very isolated, very alone in the world. If in that imaginary couple over here, if one of the spouses breaks their leg or loses their job, who do they have to call on to shovel the snow outside or fix the car or help them to move the couch from one side of the house to the other? Those let's say, micro challenges of life.
Yeah. Rather than going to the same group of people as a collectivist.
Right, collectivist culture.
Then you'd have to problem solve each problem as a new problem and with a new solution.
Right, versus a quick phone call. Hey, Uncle Bob, could you come help me? The dishwasher's broken and I know you work at Maytag repair place, right? So there's a lot of stuff. Even in the female network from that group, and again, I hope they'll forgive me for breaching their confidentialities. It seemed all the women knew how to sew, and they all were amazing cooks. So, when there was an event, they didn't have to go and buy a whole bunch of stuff from Save-On because everybody would bring cookies or pizza or muffins, and if you needed your dress fitted for a prom or something, you could just go ask Auntie so-and-so, could you bring in the dress, right?
Yeah.
So it gave them a lot of resources and support. And I suspect Indigenous people are often doing that same kind of thing too. That everybody does their very best to help everybody. The downside could be is if you do breach a rule or you break some kind of expectation, i.e., let's say, depending, like with the Italian Catholic circle, there could be issues around if you woke up one day and realized you were a lesbian, or you were wanting a divorce, or some of those kind of rules that wanting an abortion, or your husband was beating you but you couldn't talk about it to anybody because he's the son of the family and you're all intertwined, right?
That, or he might have relations with the church, like being the
that he might have all kinds of friends who wouldn't support your choices, right? So how is this useful in a practical way? I would suggest if you're doing family counseling or you see yourself as a counselor, that should be part of your intake with anybody, asking them, what kind of friendship network do you have? In the past, did you have friendships? What's the best friendship you've had in your life? If your car broke down, is there someone you could call on? Who are they? What would it feel like to call on them and ask for a little bit of help? And you can probably get a sense of the strength and resilience in a potential family or for a potential individual with some of those kind of questions. It could potentially pretty quickly tell you some things that would be useful, because our task with anybody in front of us, any couple, any mom and her kid, is to get a good sense of how they fit into the world and how they feel brave or they feel frightened. If I knew I had 100 people to call upon if I was in a situation, I'd feel pretty powerful. I feel like I got a posse, I got a crowd, I got a team. But if I felt completely alone in the world, when I came here to BC from Ontario, I had been hired for my job, let's say 6 months before in Montreal. I got interviewed in Montreal and got hired. And when I came here, I did not know one single person in BC. Not one. And so I had to reestablish everything. I needed a dentist, I needed a doctor, I needed an optometrist, I needed a vet, I needed to know what taxi company, all those kind of things. And if I had had a new friend, that's probably how I did achieve it, is I started to make friends, and then, oh, what's the vet that you go to, or what taxi company do you, or, tax company, oh, I use this lady at H&R Block, or those kind of things. We take a lot of that for granted, and those are sometimes the things when someone's a brand new immigrant to Canada, they have to figure out, oh, I don't have that whole network and collective to support me. Right? Mm-hmm. So the immigrant settlement process sometimes is helping them to achieve that.
Yeah.
Right? So that I just want to conclude with a little bit about later in life. And again, I'll use a family story of my own. My grandpa, whom I love dearly, and as I just said, I had moved here. So the last few years of his life, I would phone him every day. I phoned him every day, ever. But now I was here. So if I phoned him and he needed something, I couldn't very well help him because he's in Northern Ontario and I'm in Northern BC. Although I still could make phone calls and stuff like that, right? So he was, let's say, 90, 89, something like that when I moved here. But he had set up some clever friendship things. And I'll give you one example that I thought, oh, that's so cool. I'll give you two examples. One was, he had an agreement with his neighbor, who also were elderly people, that every morning when he got up, he would put his blind up. So so would they. So the cue was, if they ever looked over and his blind wasn't up, something was wrong. And they had a key to his house and they could come in at any time, and vice versa. So isn't that the most clever kind of thing?
Yeah.
Right? Yay. And that was a friend who had lived next door for years and years and years, right? So there were a few times where he fell, where he had had a heart attack at one point. So they would call an ambulance, go over and call an ambulance because something's wrong. the blind is not, right? Well, it's like, yay. And another cool thing that he did, and these are just organic things that ordinary folk come up with, right? Without a social worker's intervention, but hey, we could use that someday. Scoop that idea and apply it. So another one was he gardened all his life. He had a little garden outside. And because he was very shy, even to the last day of his life, my grandpa was very, very shy and very non-impositional. He would never initiate a conversation with anyone, not even with me. I'd have to phone him. He wouldn't phone me, right? And I know he loved me. But he had this garden, which meant that he could have zucchinis, he could have tomatoes, he could have cucumbers. So he could knock on people's doors around his house, and he could say, I wanted to give you these. Conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that and using like gifts is kind of like, I've heard that used as like a love language or whatever.
Yes, exactly. So it gave him something, and people would walk by. There was just a tiny little fence, and there was a little alleyway, a walkway. People would walk by and comment on his tomatoes or comment on his cucumbers. So friendships, that level of friendship was very important for him. And one of those times where he had the heart attack, he had fallen in the garden. And people were always looking, how's Ken doing in the garden? And they called because he had fallen there, right? So he lived alone the last few years of his life. Before the last 2 years or so, he ended up being in an elder care home. But those years between when my grandma died and when he moved, maybe 8 years living by himself. Part of why he was able to live by himself is he had friends checking on the blind every day. He had friends who shoveled the snow. He had friends who checked in and chatted with him through the garden. And he had a legal relative who would phone him and so on. He did have a multitude of network, right? But as people get older, friendships can be very, very, very powerful. If you're living alone in your 60s, 70s, 80s, but you have 2 or 3 good friends, and maybe the 3 of you every third Sunday you go to the Pizza Hut together. That was another thing he did. He went to Swiss Chalet with a couple of his friends now and then, and that was a big thing for him. But that was very important for his social life and his cognitive lucidity and energy, right? Said differently, had he had no friends, he would have been very, very isolated, right? And that would have, I think, disinclined him to end up living to be 94. So yay Grandpa, yay friends, and yay social workers working with families, working with social worker victims of abuse. Sometimes one of the best things we can do, the idea that's very common when give a person a fish and they eat for a day, teach them to fish, and then they can feed themselves forever, and they can feed their children and grandchildren. So if you can teach everybody you work with about friendship, about building friendships. My grandpa was so shy, he had no idea how to make a conversation, but he had stumbled upon the zucchini thing, right? So asking people, what could you get involved with? What volunteer work could you do? Where could you hang out? For me, the women's movement became a big, powerful resource in my life that literally was life-changing and continues to be life-changing. I have you two in my life because of the Women's Center. Right?
Yeah.
And you two, I suspect, had you each gotten a job this summer flipping burgers somewhere, you wouldn't be as enriched by September as this has been for you with the Women's Center, right?
Yeah.
So encouraging our clients, get involved in something, right? What I find with this group over here, the white working poor women, they often, because they're so overwhelmed, they don't volunteer anywhere. They don't get involved in anything. Because they'll literally say, what's in it for me? Why would I do that? Right? And we may say to them, well, let me tell you some of the subtle ways that this will be really good for you. You'll meet new people. You'll learn new skills. You'll have something to put on your resume. You'll get cheered up sometimes. Sometimes you'll get free muffins, right? You'll get job opportunities. You'll get to feel more enlightened about how the world works.
Yeah, right? Maybe you feel like you're contributing to your community.
Yeah, your self-esteem will be grown. Often the indigenous women and the Italian Catholic women, for example, they had that. It just was who they were. They didn't even think about it, right?
Is that more of like the collectivist versus
the collective and the
individualistic.
network versus the individualistic. But the person who's going to end up in a social worker's office is the person struggling because they have no one.
Mm-hmm. And also
Right.
the person who won't volunteer and won't increase their network because they could have had those people potentially through their volunteer work that they didn't do.
Right, exactly. So how do we encourage them as part of our healing and strengthening and fortifying kit that we offer them? Because sometimes in social work the goal is to just, solve this immediate problem, get them out the door. But if we can also work with them of how could we enhance your friendship network for the next time you have a struggle. It's a preventative thing, right? Same with grief, that all the people who showed up for our event around Ken and Creativity Night and so on, that was very soul soothing for me. And again, if you had someone who died or someone who's really sick and you had nobody to talk to about it, you're going to end up with a social worker, right?
Yeah.
Right? And or you may take up drinking, or you may take up some kind of other unwholesome, unhealthy strategy for dealing with your grief and pain and ache, right? But if we can teach people ongoingly, in little ones, when you think of big sisters and big brothers, what is that all about? Network, creating a supportive network, right? So that's do you have any other things about friendship? Try to be a good friend, be kind. Remember to phone people now and then too. I could say to you as a social work professional, we did do a video also separately on self-care. I would really encourage you as a social worker, no matter what you're doing, whether it's family counseling or social work with victims of abuse or working with the elderly, you too need to have a good comradely network where you can reach out and be supported and affirmed and do some reality checking now and then and manage all the little crises in your own life that, oh, my car broke down but I still have to get to work, or oh, I need $50 to buy a bus pass, or oh, I can't get back home. I can't get home until 10 o'clock tonight because of this crisis at work, but I need someone to pick up my kid at 6 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
The more we have a friendship network and a comradely network, the better. So we have to be good friends. We've got to step up on behalf of the folks we care about versus just being when we're in crisis and needy, right? That also has to be reciprocal and collegial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you for coming to one more of our videos. Friendship, the life cycle, the network, it's a support. Make sure you ask about it and make sure that you live the best friendship self that you can live. Thank you, Carlene, my friend. Thank you, Tuba, my friend.